So my name is Ted Verani. I am head of business development for scientific revenue. Maybe you saw me talk a little earlier here today. We do dynamic pricing for in-app purchases. So using machine learning technology, deep knowledge of behavioral patterns, what we're trying to do is player comes in the game, we segment you in real time, we match the right price, right time, right location for players. But before we can actually help you with pricing, this conversation is not about pricing, you need a game that works, right? And that's today's topic, designing a game for optimal IP because, excuse me, not making a purchase, that's not a pricing problem at all, right? It's a problem with the game. It's not quite getting not compelling enough, and and it's hard to do. It takes a deep knowledge of, virtual game design. It's the storefront, the player psychology, UX, a whole bunch of it. So I think we're fortunate to have 3 experts on the subject, all of them with experience in designing and building games and owning games for their company. So let each of you first introduce yourselves, your company, and maybe talk about a game you're working on or maybe you're just most proud about.
Hello, I'm Ian Griffiths. I am a product owner or sort of game director at Hutch. I'm currently working on a new racing game, which I can't say. Just under
Is that the one you're most excited about?
Super excited about it.
Okay.
It's awesome. I previously, about 6 months ago, launched a game called Top Drives, which was a CCG-based car game. We mostly focus on sort of automotive racing titles.
Yeah.
I'm Casey Dickinson. I'm the general manager of FTX Games. We do IP-based games. We worked with the Hunger Games, Mission Impossible, Rocky. Most recently, Narcos Cartel Wars, based on the Narcos license. We have a handful of additional projects that we're working on right now using a combination of world-class IP and third-party developers. We pair those two together and then pour money into the top of the funnel and then split it through our partnerships.
Hey, Jefferson Valadares. I'm the VP of Mobile for Bandai Namco. I mean, most people know Namco for Pac-Man, and a lot of people realize they were like the #6 mobile publisher in the world by revenue. Mostly because it's invisible in the West, because we make a lot of our money in Japan. But we do have games that work here, like Dragon Ball Dokkan Battle is the biggest example that that does success here. So we kind of learning how to cross. Our IP tends to be very Japanese too. So part of my job is try to increase the non-Japaneseness of the company, and that includes IP, but also like how to market the games and how to develop, message, drive the community, because it's all different from like how they do things in Japan.
Cool. So clearly free to play, great revenue driver. That's why we're here. But I'm curious first on like how maybe designing for a free to play mobile game is different than say for premium or PC title too. So since you have the mic, maybe starting with you, Jefferson, maybe Bandai Namco.
It has a mic, too.
Okay, well then, because I'm looking at you.
I mean, there's really no difference. It's the same.
Okay.
But no, I mean, anybody who looked at it like knows it's pretty different. I think there's. I think the main challenge is the fact that when you do a premium game, like you get the commitment from the player from the beginning because they're already buying, so they're already committed to kind of learn, and your tutorial can be bad because they're gonna go through it because they paid for it, so they're gonna learn, and you can have a lot of issues with your game that they're gonna soldier through because they just paid $60, right? Like so that's kind of like what you get for free when you do premium. In the case of free to play, like it's the opposite. Like they come to a game like, do I even want to look at this? And they look at it. If it takes too long to load, it's like or if they don't understand what the first button is, like If they look at the art and it's not what they want, it's like yeah. So you're basically fighting like every step to convince people that like this is worth their time, and you're not competing just against other games, but you're also competing against. They could be on Messenger, they could be texting other people, they could be Instagram. Like there's so many things people could be doing in their device, and you're kind of competing with all of that. So it's about like being. I think the key word is like having purpose. Like everything you have in a game needs to have a purpose. Like you gotta there can be no accidents. Like everything needs to be there for a reason. So from that point of view, like I think the word design is like perfect for this because like really those things are way more designed than premium games.
So Casey, you worked at Sony Online earlier in your career too, so you have experience in both sides of the mall?
Yeah, so I started in the industry about 15 years ago on the original EverQuest back in the day for Sony Online, and one of positions I had towards the end was launching a game called Free Realms. And Free Realms was an original free-to-play game in the Western market, and that was just starting to expand. And the way that we were kind of approaching it at the time was where do we put this walled garden? Where do we put do we want to go wide and deep? Like, where do we make the line between free content versus paid content, and how do we monetize that? And I think that there's still a lot of learning along those lines. I think that there's, you want to present value to players. You want to give this enough of a free experience, always, of course, to keep people engaged and retained, especially with multiplayer games. Our Narcos game, for example, has a critical mass of players. If there's no matchmaking of free players, then our whales won't stick around. But we're still very much a whale-driven economy, where the majority of our revenue, of course, is coming from that couple of % of players that are spending $10,000 and $20,000. So it's always a balance, and I think that what he was saying makes a lot of sense too. We really have to constantly be thinking about the player experience and creating value for free players while being cognizant that they can expand their experience by giving us money. And there's interesting ways now that we're still in the nascent stages of free-to-play for all intents and purposes, where we're exploring new ways of kind of doing that. Things like subscriptions that are coming along. Does that make sense in the context of free-to-play games? Is this even a sustainable model, right? How many users, how many whales can we use, and is that predatory at all? Thinking about, wouldn't it be great to take a little bit of money from a lot of people rather than a lot of money from few people? Those are the things that we think about.
Okay.
Yeah. From a design perspective, it's very fundamental, right? I mean, it's as fundamental as whether you're picking a first-person camera or third-person camera, kind of down to genre or input type. It really has to be at the base of the game from when you're designing it that you need to think about the free-to-play experience and how you build in, whether it's kind of a more retention-based progression model or more of a sort of a more casual type that isn't going for that. Obviously, the kind of dynamic around whales based on how whale-heavy your game is, you need to be thinking about all of that. But yeah, I mean, free-to-play is very fundamental to what you're doing.
Okay, so to kind of continuing on that theme, I guess maybe sticking with you here, Ian, working back, you want to hear everyone on this, but like, what then, from design perspective, what would be your list of do's and don'ts when you get started on building a new game?
I mean, it's tricky, right? Every game is going to be somewhat organic as you develop it, but there's always a sort of set of rules that you're going to follow. You really need to make sure that your game has a long game if you want to build a strong monetization model. I mean, essentially, if you've got good retention and a decent game that can be played over a number of months, you can basically turn that into monetization. Of course, there's the other side, the sort of hyper-casual, where you're focused more on an ad-based model. But at Hutch, we much more tending to focus on this sort of longer game retention model. I think the do's, I mean, you've really just got to touch on what it is that you want your player experience to be, kind of how you're building them into the game so that they're learning the core loop, the core gameplay, and then how they're learning how that folds into the metagame, making sure that they experience that, so that you can find points at which to deliver the most valuable content to them at the right time.
And at what point will then monetization come into is that like later, if you kind of you figure out the content, kind of figure out the concept, or is it right in the beginning you're figuring that aspect for a free-to-play?
From a design perspective?
Yeah.
From a design perspective, we're always thinking of it sort of very early on, right? I mean, initially when we kind of do prototyping, so we'll put out a game after 6 to 8 weeks, and we'll see the retention coming in, and then based on that and then some internal testing, we'll think about what we can do to develop it. But like I said, if you've got retention and you think you can build a long game, you can generally build some kind of monetization model in there.
Okay.
There's so many different ways to build monetization that you can get in there. What's interesting is in terms of when you deliver monetization to a player, there's so many different ways that players spend through the game. Some players will spend 20 minutes in, some people will wait months and months. You've basically got to hit all of those points and make sure you're delivering the sort of value and you're hitting them with the right offers at the right time.
Okay. Casey, what are your do's and don'ts for designing
Our business model is a little bit different in that we take existing games usually and existing game engines that are already performing in the market, and then we bring IP to them. So in large part, we're not taking a whole lot of development or design risk. We're looking at things that work, and we know that those things work. One of the things that I would say is that knowing your audience and knowing the demographic for the genre that you have is super important. Things like slots, you can't necessarily expect somebody to monetize in that first session, but you still generally want to give, if somebody wants to give you money, make sure that you're there to take it, kind of thing. So that there's always an option to convert a player and to monetize that player, kind of no matter what they're doing. If they want to get just a little bit deeper into whatever experience they're currently having in the game, give them the option to give you money to do that, because you're just missing those opportunities. Like you were saying, there's depending on the player characteristics for that particular segment, they might have an entirely different curve, and then start thinking about, okay, this type of person, we've seen in the past that these types of people are monetizing at X point. Let's make sure that we're presenting them with value at that point. And understanding that the more that we can cater those offers and that package to that particular player type, the better off we're going to do. So on a high level, from a genre perspective, kind of know the audience that's there, and on the micro level, know the internal segments within your game and hit them with the right points.
No, that makes sense. And what, and does that change? You mentioned, I know Narcos you work on, and FTX, you focus on doing IP, games too. Does it change because of the brand involved, or is that just, would you say, just general sort of rules?
I think it does. One of the things that we noticed from Narcos that when we started looking at kind of our players that were, we took a deep dive into our players that were monetizing in the biggest way. So taking a look at our whales, what's the characteristics of them? What we found was a lot of them, it was their first game in the genre. Like, we introduced this genre to a new audience because they came in through the Narcos brand. So that's an entirely different dynamic altogether, right? So they're like, all of a sudden, they've never played a game like this, and then a year later, they gave us $20,000 to play the game. It's kind of crazy, right? But introducing them and expanding kind of the market through IP has been something that we've been doing. But the fundamental is the golden ratio of just LTV, CPI, and knowing that IP lowers one and raises the other, and it gives us the right mechanic.
Oh. Jefferson, do's and don'ts.
Yeah, I think the key, starting from the beginning, you want to make a game that people want to play. So that it's kind of obvious, but it's true in whatever games you're trying to make. So the first thing is but it's particularly, I think, critical on free games. Why would people play this versus all the other stuff that's already out there? So you got to put some thought into that. Why would people even give this a chance, right? Once they're in, you got to sell very quickly, what's the aspiration, what are they trying to achieve? So again, that's game design 101, but it's more critical in this type of game. You really want to get people to understand, okay, if I put my time and money perhaps in this thing, this is what I can get to, this is what I'm trying to do, and this is kind of the dream I have in the game, etc. Like Ian mentioned, you don't have, you got to be always thinking about monetization. You don't necessarily have to design from day one thinking oh, this is where I'm going to sell, but obviously you got to design a game that is kind of monetizable. So that if you think about a game that can run for a long time, a game that one of the big differences from particularly traditional 80s games, these games have no end, right? So it's kind of like the old arcade style, you just play until the machine breaks, and it's kind of like what free-to-plays are too. You want to make sure that the game never ends. And that means not just what the initial game is, but what is the game going to be a month from now? What is the game going to be 3 months from now? So you got to start thinking is this something I can scale over time? You can't if you can't think of ways to grow it, then it might put you in a corner later. So the sooner you kind of figure this out. So these are the things that we usually try to think about. What I wouldn't recommend is just, I guess, if you're trying to learn, it is actually not a bad idea to just copy someone else's game because you can understand what they're trying to do. But I think it's easy to, there's the effect that happens when a hit game writes the rules, right? So people see a game and they deconstruct and say, oh, this is what you got to do. If you follow all those rules, you're not going to necessarily get a hit game, right? It's very tempting. We're talking about AR. What's going to make a great AR game? And it's no, just spend 5 years building allocation-based technology and then get the Pokemon license, and there you go.
That's all you have to do.
Yeah, it's so easy. Just go and do it, right? But it's actually not that, things come together for different reasons. Every game is different. Just following some rules is not going to necessarily take you there. You really got to understand your game. It's nice to to see what other people are doing to kind of try to see how they got there. But honestly, even if you know people, some of these companies, you go ask them why did your game work? And the answer is probably going to be a little different than what you thought. Yeah. And they're going to say, oh yeah, this, it's like, oh, I love the system. And they're like, ooh, yeah, we didn't really think people would do it, but they're all over it. Like that happens all the time. So yeah, just be mindful that you got to build something that can scale, and then you got to be ready to adapt once. The other mistake that a lot of people do from the premium days is like you put your team away once the game's live. Mm-hmm. No, that's the time where the game starts, right? So that's when you actually start seeing people play, and you got to adapt and adjust. So even from a resource planning perspective, it's very different from what it used to be.
Have you ever had a game where you launched that you thought, wow, this is like, you're all happy with it, and in soft launch and just actually really believed that it was a really great game, and just did not do well in terms of monetization? Or you had just what do you do at that point? Did you, new team? Did you just, or maybe if you have a personal experience of like taking over a game that, I guess the company still believed in, but you wanted to kind of reboot it?
It's an interesting question, because usually you can't see those things in soft launch. It's different. Okay. It's difficult for you to like really see, and I mean, I guess you can fool yourself, but like the signs were probably there already. Like I've definitely seen times where people like, by time pressure or whatever, they end up releasing a game which is not ready. But it's not that people didn't know it wasn't ready. You know what I mean? Like, it just
popped in my head, sort of wondering. Anyone else have a different point of view?
I don't recall seeing at least that, but
yeah.
Yeah, we've had I think this room's probably filled with a lot of people that have had misses. Mm-hmm. The industry is full of misses. So we did a Power Rangers game, and our bet was that they're rebooting the franchise and they were going to make it a little bit more, skewed a little bit older. So we created a trading card game, a card battler that kind of skewed a little older, hoping to have the nostalgic kind of Power Rangers feel to it and have some people kind of come in the door. Got tons and tons of organic traffic of kids just installing the game, not knowing how to play it, and just uninstalling. It was, again, knowing your audience, and from an IP perspective, knowing who that audience is, then properly messaging the game. But yeah, there's plenty of stories like that of just, we thought it was going to be one thing and then we just couldn't monetize.
Yeah, I mean, failures are hard, and sometimes they're difficult for the team. I was working on Fable Legends previous to coming here, which was shut down and didn't get to see launch, which was you work on something for 3 years, and then somebody comes and kicks over the sandcastle, and you're just kind of like, no. So you do have to kind of learn to deal with it from a cultural point of view. But you always learn something from it, right? And I mean, in terms of like taking other games, I mean, I took over Jeff's EA FIFA Superstars when we were both at Playfish. Yeah. And yeah, I mean...
He just left you a mess, huh?
It was right. We reordered the economy and boosted things here and there. But there's always things that you can develop from a game as you get more and more information going on. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Like one thing that's really useful for a game that's been successful, like sometimes when it's starting to go down, like one thing that can really help is give it to another team, because like that team's gonna have fresh eyes and look at it again. Like, because once you've been in a game for like 2 years, then you think you've done everything whatever ideas you had, you probably tried already, right? And that's why it's good to kind of like get that movement and get new people.
I mean, that's something we do at Playfish, right? We'd often get new eyes to come in and take over, and people would always find new optimizations over previous iterations.
Well, yeah, and clearly we can always learn from like watching what other people are doing. I think Jeff, you said, find some game and copy it and doing well. But with that in mind, not just copying a game, but what sticking with you still, and we'll move back. What game out there, couple, 1, 3 that you've seen that just really impressed you in terms of how they design their monetization? And it gets more from point of view of, we can all study that, I guess.
I mean, it's a bit of an old one, but okay. Clash Royale, they just had they just kind of reversed the way the metagame goes. So rather than stopping you playing, like obviously energy mechanics were very big a while ago, and they're still used. They kind of flipped it around. They didn't stop you playing, they just stopped your metagame progression. And the way they monetized that was really good. What we're seeing that's quite interesting now is a bit of a return of sort of touch controls with Arena of Valor. We're seeing some more hardcore even than midcore that are monetizing very well. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of new trends coming out that are interesting. And HQ Trivia as well, that seems to be like an interesting new thing of this kind of streaming trivia question. There's always interesting new models that just pop out of nowhere. It's always good to keep an eye on them, but yeah. Yeah, Casey, any games that sort of stood out that you were just impressed with, and and maybe why you were impressed by them?
Certainly, Clash Royale and Supercell's obviously doing something right. I think that we're looking at, because one of the things when working with IP is how can we tell additional stories based on an IP. We don't want to recreate Narcos seasons 1 to 3. We want to create additional stories around it. So one of the things that we've been looking at is Pixelberry and Episode Interactive, and the way that they're monetizing content is really interesting to us. When we did our Hunger Games game, it was energy mechanic, and it was narrative based where you're playing, but we would stop people's content progression. They'd have to wait or ask a friend or do any of the or pay. The way that to allow people to progress but not to get the full experience, to keep some content behind the velvet rope and entice people to kind of go do that while you can still play the game is really interesting to us. So we're keeping an eye on that genre in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I love kind of storytelling games, so I was actually going to say that, so thanks for stealing my answer. But I like them more by the fact that they prove that something can be done than necessarily the mechanics. I think the mechanics are very Gen 1 type thing. Like, I think you can do a lot better than that, but like, I really like that they prove that, there's a market for that kind of stuff if you know what you're doing. And I think that was, so I'm very happy for them. Pixelberry, they're very close to us in the Bay Area, like they're great guys. And it's amazing how a lot of things, like stories. I mean, I've been in mobile for 12 years, and back in the 2000s or whatever, like if you told somebody you're going to make a mobile game that was about text, people would be like beating you with the head, like, you're crazy and get out of here, and who wants to read on their phone? But that behaviors change. Like, sometimes even if the device didn't change, like, people's behaviors change. People actually use their phones as their primary ways of like looking at media today, right? So they don't watch. People said, oh, people never watch a high-end video on their phone because they're gonna wait until they get home and watch on their HD TV. No, it was like I was flying, and there's a lot of people watching stuff on their phones. It's not even on an iPad, like that. So it really changed, and that's why I think people even read on their phones and everything now. So a lot of things that weren't possible become possible when the audience changes.
Looking at what other you mentioned trivia in terms of monetization trends too. Any other monetization trends you've seen in the last year that we should all keep an eye on, or that you think are interesting? In case you can go ahead and jump on it if you want, Jeff. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, like the episode and choices thing. It's like one example of something that wasn't really happening until recently, and now it is. I'm really excited about like things like Design Home, which is like a very non-game game, but like it does super well too, because it's a different way of monetizing as well, and they have partnerships with the furniture makers and stuff. So there's a lot of exciting things you can do if you find the right hook and you execute well. Like I still think there's a lot of like you mentioned, it's still early days of free to play, and I agree with that. So yeah, there's still I'm sure there's still plenty of ways to do different things that we haven't figured out yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ian or Casey?
I was just going to say, so I think what's going on is more that people are learning to optimize the experiences that they have. We're not seeing so much new stuff. I mean, like, new stuff does crop up, but I mean, mostly it just seems to be people kind of figuring out how their event system works or how their sort of clan system works, and then finding good ways to get sort of reciprocal play and then monetization out of that. That seems to be where I see a lot of monetization doing well.
Okay.
Yeah, I would love to see premium games be economically viable. I don't see that it is yet. I'd love for somebody to find a solution to that. I'd love to see somebody figure out a way to make subscriptions work in a real way that's not dropping into some sort of content crucible where you're constantly having to churn out content for your subscribers to give them value, but creating some sort of repeatable value that they can have. That can be done certainly through offers and on hard currency and things like that. But I think that there's room to explore into those channels as well.
Well, I'm glad you brought up subscriptions, just to kind of keep on that, because last year, early part of last year, right? Apple was really, pushing that pretty hard, and people were, Apple's going to make subscriptions available, and then it was like a knee-jerk sort of, Apple's make subscriptions available. What are we going to do? But then you hadn't really seen much around that. Why?
Yeah, I've seen. I think the first thing people tried, it's kind of obvious. Like they can have like VIP clubs, and they have like some of these things that you can do. Yeah, I don't know that anybody did something particularly different and like that they really increase the value. But I think there's something there too. For example, like I think there's people need to try that more and try to find. Also, know your audience. Like some people are more willing to do a subscription than to be free to play. Like sometimes people have that bad feeling about free to play, like, oh, why I'm spending, like, why is the game asking me for more money? Just give me upfront. Maybe they're more willing to do a subscription. So maybe for like a more core type audience, subscription is going to be better than if you're just talking about like traditional casuals. But yeah, there's different areas still that need to be further explored for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say on the flip side of the subscription, typically when you kind of look at what subscription worked on PC, kids titles did, right? As a father, like if I knew that I could just pay $5 a month to give my kids like a Club Penguin subscription, that was relatively easy. I knew exactly what they were going to get, and it would be relatively painless. Just set the reminder to remember to check they're still playing it before, so you can unsubscribe. But I think the kids market is also interesting because for us, we can't approach the economics of doing kids titles. Just there's great kids IP and we just can't touch it because it just doesn't fit our model. So if there was a way to increase LTV and actually monetize kids through a way that was safe and parents supported it, we'd be all over it.
So you're telling you can't make like Narcos for kids?
We saw, subscription.
Fuzzy, animals, yeah.
We saw subscription obviously pick up big in sort of World of Warcraft, right? That's where it made a lot of money on PC, and a lot of different games sort of chased that model. There were some flops. I think it was APB or something that didn't do too well. But subscription still isn't like the main driver on PC. It's still premium paid. I think one of the strengths of free to play is that you give people an opportunity to spend according to their means and how much interest they have in your games. When you've got a subscription, it tends to be at a limited price. So
I would argue like what you should do is do what you're saying, like make it free with an option of subscription. Because like you can't if subscription is forced, then that's not going to work.
Yeah,
like, it needs to be like a hybrid from what it used to be.
Wargaming does one right with the sort of monetization. So it is a possible model. It's probably a good way to get. It's probably a good value proposition for the smaller end of the scale that are going to be spending. But yeah.
Can you have additional IPs within a subscription game?
I think you'd almost have to if you want to make the most out of
money,
it.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing about free to play is like you're really trying to monetize the demand curve. Like if you studied economics, you know what that is. But like basically, it's like before it used to be you had one price and then you sold X units. Like with free to play, what it really enables you is to sell a lot of units at 0, and then sell some units at 1, like $2, $5, $10, $100, tens of thousands of dollars. So I think that's what these games do that makes them successful is the fact that and you got to plan this, by the way. Like don't let this be an accident, but you really got to think about like, okay, like how can I give enough value for somebody to never spend money, for somebody to spend $5 if they only have $5 to spend. Like how can I make them really happy about those $5, right? Versus going to the movies or other things they could be doing with the same amount of money. And if you really like think about that those games are the ones that end up having the people who end up spending a lot, because trust me, nobody would put $10,000 in a game if they didn't feel it was worth it. Like it's $10,000. Well, maybe some Middle East like a oil person maybe might do it, but like normal people wouldn't put $10,000 in a game unless they really liked it, right? Like the experience, they got something out of it for sure. We did a panel one conference in SF the other day with like a couple of whales from Game of War, and everybody came to the thing saying, like, you guys are idiots, and they're like, guys, don't worry about me. I have a business. I make a lot of money. Don't worry about me. Like I spend this. We get a lot of enjoyment. We get to get outside of the game. We plan stuff. We go out on the weekends with the team and do all this stuff. And you're like, oh, okay, it's a thing. Yeah. But sometimes you can have that attitude because you're not part of the system and can just say, whatever, right? But it's not. You shouldn't discount those games just because you don't understand them. Try to understand them.
As somebody who's done monetization design, when I see stuff like Netflix, I just kind of look at it and look at all the money that they're leaving on the table. Like there's so much more they could add on to the experience that they could kind of drive additional revenue for. Like it's a good baseline, but there's always room for more money.
Cool. Why? Okay. So, everyone, we do pricing, right? And we kind of sort of two levers to pull. We can pull like storefront. As we change prices there, but if someone doesn't go to the storefront, we'll interstitial or some sort of splash screen, right? That's how we get kind of maximum lift. I was surprised at some games we've worked with that overall kind of monetized well and had good traffic, but then they had no UI built in for doing price-based offers. Of course, we were disappointed because a lot of people didn't go there. But is there a reason why you would not do that, or is that just an oversight from me?
No, I think game makers don't realize many times how much UI, and in really a lot of free-to-play games is 90% UI. But traditionally games used to be there's a game, and then there's this thing you outsource to some marketing agency who's going to make the menus, right? That's how it was in console days, and so I think a lot of people underestimate the UI and how flexible and if you want to really make a difference, you got to have a system that is flexible, that you can do all the things you're talking about, in merchandising, right? It's critical to maximize. You can be successful without them, but if you really want to extract the maximum you can from something, not leave money on the table, you really should be able to have all those things.
Yeah, some games we have 60% of their players never went to the storefront, and they showed engagement, signals that said they liked the game, and they might have, they just didn't think to go buy anything. It's yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've seen from that is that when you have a game that's operating at scale, all of a sudden those tiny levers become very big, right? They have a huge effect. The increase of 1% to 2% in ARPDAU is huge when you have a big game that's operating, when you can really optimize with data. Otherwise, if you're a small team, your game is kind of in middling and it's not quite getting there, there's usually lots of bigger problems that you're trying to solve rather than those smaller problems. But not having the opportunity to provide offers and understand that, if you're designing a free-to-play game, that has to be part of the core design experience.
I've never worked on a game where people don't underestimate how difficult UI is.
Yeah.
UI is quite a difficult thing, not just from implementation, but the UX design, the visual design. People often leave it quite late because they think they can add it after the core experience is there. So sometimes it doesn't quite get the prioritization that it needs. I think in terms of designing a store, you do really want to make sure that's on your list for how you're delivering stuff to players and how you're showing stuff to players. I was watching a video, I can't remember which game it was, but they said when they had their daily reward pop up, it would take you through to the store to redeem it, and that increased their monetization a few 100%.
Wow.
I don't know whether they're embellishing, but pushing people to the store is definitely a worthwhile thing. It used to be the case that people would often say on every screen you want to make sure that you've got some offer or some type of monetization. Obviously not mid-gameplay, but throughout your UI screen, throughout your UI menu flow, you really do want quick links back to the shop.
Okay, good. I have more questions to keep going, but I do, we have, like I said, experts were designing games for optimal IAPs, so I do want to give some time, certainly for questions. So I will now throw that out, and then I can keep asking. Does anyone have any questions at this point, since we have 5 minutes left for a session? Going once, going twice. All right. Feel free to. Well, I'll ask again in a couple minutes too. But so we talked about designing games for make it work in the process. At what point you do design? How about what KPIs do you guys leave? So you got a game in soft launch. What are the KPIs that you look at and I think are most important to say, yeah, it's going to work. Let's push go. Let's put it up to global launch at this point.
Sort of pre-launch, like I said, we're very much interested in retention. Retention is such a good indicator for how popular your game is, and then basically what we do is we add in new features and we put them out to deploy and we test them and we see how well they do. We do set ourselves sort of benchmark KPIs that we want to hit around mostly retention and monetization, and once we hit those, we're generally good to go. We won't always wait to hit those. Sometimes we're a bit ambitious and we're just the amount of effort to get it that extra couple of % is probably more than we're going to get from doing it. So there's always that cost-benefit analysis, but those are always super important. And then there's also the KPIs once you've launched. So once you launch, you're always every morning I'm always checking every stat, basically going through. I'm looking for any big changes, any obvious trends. Obviously the analytics guys are going to come and tell us of larger trends, but I'm always interested in quality of service and health and making sure everything's going on well.
Oh, and you're working with timelines. I'm sure that because Narco season's starting and things like that too. That probably drives launch, right? Yeah, how's that sort of change go because you got an IP associated to it?
Yeah, I think when we initially started doing IP-based games, whatever it was, 7 years ago, I think that we were much more cognizant of making sure that we were hitting marketing windows, and that would kind of drive. So, let's make sure that we get the marketing lift for the first. We launched day and date with the first Hunger Games film. That was a hard date that we needed to hit. Now, I think that our perspective and the IP that we try to work with is evergreen, so that we are less milestone or deadline driven and make sure that we give the game the right amount of time for development. But we're also not afraid of kind of optimizing on production. So we definitely care about retention from the beginning, and that's the first metric that we look at to make sure the game is sticky and have people coming back. But we also have the luxury of being able to compare KPIs for the game that we're working on versus the source material, which was the game that the developer had released before. We can make sure that we're getting the appropriate brand lift that we expected, so the retention number should be up, the conversion should be up, and then of course pairing all of this stuff back to CPI, so that because we're such a UA-driven organization, that we have to make sure that is profitable for us. But generally speaking, it depends on the timeline, and then making sure that we're isolating metrics so that we can have causality, because that becomes very difficult, especially at launch when you have a million things that are happening kind of at once. What is actually moving the needle, and how are we properly framing our A/B tests in order to be sure that we can say that this had this effect and we should roll it out to everybody else?
I mean, it's really useful to try and get a feel of LTV, but sometimes it's tricky because it doesn't respond very quickly to changes. So
yeah, we usually I was gonna mention something similar to that, data, having people who understand how to read data is very important. And sometimes you work in large corporations. A lot of my experience is working in large corporations, and there's things like reports that go out, and then there's executives who read it and we're gonna cancel this game because it's only making this much money in daily revenue. It's well, it's in soft launch. We're actually not you really shouldn't be looking at the daily revenue because that's not what we're looking at right now. But even this, you gotta go and educate the teams. Okay, what are we gonna look at? We're gonna look at these KPIs. It's usually the normalized ones, right? So code retention, you look at ARPDAU, how much money per user you're making on that day, what's the conversion of a new user, the first time somebody makes the purchase, for somebody who already made the purchase, what's the percentage chance that they're going to make a second purchase? So you look at different things which are more specific about the behavior of the player. You really don't look at absolutes, even LTV, we don't really look at it at that time. I mean, we tried to make some calculations, but really we're trying to look at the day-to-day kind of, more month, 2 month kind of thinking about the game, because if you really don't know what you're looking for, then you're gonna make some bad decisions. You might have something good in your hands, or vice versa, you might have something bad in your hands. If you don't know what you're reading or what the data is telling you, you can get into trouble.
Does it change once you're live now?
Live it's a little bit more. Then you can look at revenue.
Then the executives can look at the reports.
Yeah.
Well, what about things like repeat purchase or other things?
Yeah, we look at all of that, even in the beginning. But usually we don't pay as much attention early on because there's not enough people and there's not enough purchases. But yeah, we start looking at that maybe month 2 of soft launch or something. Then we start looking at those things too.
Okay. Pausing. Question?
Yeah, I have a question. I'll give you a mic so that I'm down the back.
Thanks. Do you know of any examples of games that successfully transitioned from premium to IAP?
The Team Fortress 2 on PC, not mobile, they were obviously paid at first, and then, Valve have been pretty successful with Dota 2, but they've got a heavily sort of loot-based economy there,
Yeah.
Not a lot of games do it, because like we said earlier, when you're building a game, you generally build free-to-play up from the beginning. So if you've built a premium game and then you're trying to sort of jam free-to-play in there, it can be difficult and doesn't always work.
And like I'd mentioned earlier, my start was at Sony Online, so it was in the MMO space, and if you all recall, the death throes of the MMO space were all of these subscription games trying to make the transition to free-to-play. It was the going joke that's free-to-play is where good MMOs go to die. It was, it's very hard. Like we were saying, really making sure that monetization is part of the design of the core game. Going back and trying to change that, especially changing player expectations, right? So you had players that maybe were a fan and liked the original game, and all of a sudden you're giving them a different monetization mechanic. It's going to change the way the game looks and feels, and chances are it's going to lose the magic.